I was about to say, welcome to the John Vincent Podcast, but actually, I want you to be a consistent participant in the John Vincent Podcast. So, you guys, welcome on behalf of Ash and John to the John Vincent Podcast.
Thank you so much, John.
Ash, I came up on something called The Train, and I listened to a podcast that you were in previously, and it was me interviewing you for Winning Not Fighting.
Yes, I remember. That was fantastic.
You are not just an inspiration for how you help people with that podcast, but I said to you something which I will now say to you, to your face on camera, which is you have changed my life.
Oh, that's very kind. Well, you've changed your life.
Well, that's very... I think a big part of the John Vincent Podcast is to remind people that they have the responsibility, the freedom and the opportunity to take ownership for that.
Absolutely.
Sometimes it takes a nudge and it takes a coach. And I think that one of the things that you do is not just your medical knowledge, which is supreme, but your people skills.
Thank you.
Are absolutely supreme, and the energy that you impart to people to allow them to take that ownership. So thank you so much.
Well, it's a pleasure. I mean, we are humans, and humanism is part and parcel of all healing.
I think that people do abstract it, don't they? Yeah. I mean, I was my daughter, who called Natasha. She is about a metre away from us behind the camera. She was having her appendix potentially taken out, and she willed herself not to have her appendix taken out. And someone came and spoke to her, and the person next door put his hands behind his back and said, "I am the SHO." And I think he meant senior health officer.
He did.
Is that yes?
He
And
did.
so, and then these poor kids. My daughter was probably 7, and the other kid in the bed next door. They didn't know what an SHO was. But I mean, they're like, "Is this someone come to take me away? I mean, what does the SHO do?"
Yes,
but
exactly.
But I think humanity is very important. Ash, this is not your first podcast. No. I'm so grateful that you've taken time out to do this. We would like you to be a regular contributor to this podcast.
Thank you. Well, it would be a pleasure.
The John Vincent Podcast is all about wholeness.
Yeah.
It's about something we spoke about in that previous podcast. You talked about it. It's about wholeness of mind, body, spirit, about understanding the little picture, the big picture, and it's about the system.
Yes.
That's something you're passionate about.
Totally.
Tell us about that.
What we must realize is nothing happens in isolation. You're made of 30 trillion cells, and they all talk to each other. They're all connected. So the mind, body, soul is one. If something's wrong in one place, it's wrong everywhere. So the psychology, the neurology, the immunology, and the endocrinology, the main places of the body, are all working together. The issue we have in our conventional world is that we have multiple specialisms, and we sort of isolate problems into specialists columns. And so what you'll get is an opinion from a cardiologist, for example, an opinion from a respiratory consultant, but they don't work together. So you go in and you get one thing fixed. And unfortunately, we don't look at the collateral damage to the rest of the body in just fixing that one relationship. Your body looks after every cell together. So we are one, which is why holistic care is essential. It's paramount if you're going to heal people.
Why does the word holistic have such a bad rap then in the NHS, for example?
I mean, that's a very good point. It almost looks fluffy, witchcraft, voodoo. Yeah. And I think a lot of it's to do with how medicine grew up. Before 1920s, all doctors were nutritionists. They looked at experience over thousands of years, and that journey led them to come up to where they were. And then, of course, the medical schools came and the Rockefeller companies came in and they patented drugs. So what they did was basically vilify nutritional values, vilify earthing, breathing, saying there's no evidence. But of course, they created the parameters for the evidence. And then the drug companies came in. So slowly, these individuals were marginalized. Well, that's where we are today.
Ash, you've already covered many of the themes in the podcast, which are really around whole body, systemic thinking. Why are things happening to us individuals based on the economic incentives around us, institutional incentives around us? It reminds me that, you know, in economics, and I think in something I did for the Council for Sustainable Business, was look at the idea of externalities in economics. And externalities are those things which either on a benefit basis or on a downside basis, the impact that companies have on the world that they do not capture on their own balance sheet. So let's say take the stock exchange of a drugs company stock exchange listing will be, they say, look, we've created a lot of value this year. And the value they mean will be in dollars, the share price or the share valuation, the total shareholder valuation of their company. They will say we've doubled value in this year.
Yeah.
They do not mean value for society,
No.
for anyone else,
No.
but they also do not count the destruction
No.
of society
Yeah.
as a result of what they do. So the trouble is, incentives at the moment are such that we are always measuring the internal measurable value created by a CEO, but he or she does not count the negative or positive value outside. And so you're exactly right. And I think it was, possibly some of the titans of America said, if I were to create free energy, what good is that for me?
Yes.
I have to be able to capture that value. And I think health, nutrition, exercise, these are all externalities
Yes.
that no one can capture the value of, and therefore they don't get addressed and
You
valued.
couldn't have summarized it better. So in medicine, the platform of conventional medicine is called the randomized controlled trial. What is a randomized controlled trial? It means you look at one relationship for a drug, for example, but you neutralize the rest of the system. So you only look at that one bit. Now, when you look at that one bit and you get a result, the drug comes out saying it works. They don't look at the collateral damage. They don't look at consequence. They don't look at everything else. And because they say it's a controlled trial. The reality is your body, as we said, is one. One intervention here will have a catalyst effect everywhere else. And that doesn't seem to matter in these randomized controlled trials. So it's exactly what you just
Am I right
said.
in thinking that in RCT, a randomized controlled trial, two things are happening on the externalities. One is they might happen on a longitudinal basis over many years.
Yes.
And also there might be a whole bunch of different symptoms that drug has caused negatively that actually it's so difficult to track the commonality. Someone could have a gut issue as a result of that. Someone a brain issue. So who's going to sit there and say
Who's going to bring it together?
Who can?
Nobody can.
Because actually there are so many other plausible causes of those other issues.
Exactly. And remember, this randomized controlled trial will bring in a diagnosis. So you'll go to a doctor and they will be rewarded by making a diagnosis, putting a label to your symptoms. Now, we have 126,000 of them now. So effectively with that, you'll have 126,000 treatments and 126,000 tests. So by rewarding this diagnostic model, you're swelling the corporate profit. Now, the body doesn't say, it talks to you. We don't call them, so effectively you go to a doctor, it's a symptom, then it's a diagnosis after a test. In the world we live in, it's a signal. Your body's protesting at you. Your headache is because it's screaming at you saying there's something wrong. So rather than look and think about what's going on, we hand that to an expert. You get a label and you live by that label.
Ash, you've just described what we have talked about in a little trailer we did for this podcast about the first verse of the Tao Te Ching, the 600 BC Chinese text of Taoism, that said the Tao is at the same time the dark everything that cannot be comprehended.
Yes.
And at the same time is the 10,000 things that we see as separate.
Yes.
And the ICD classification of disease is assuming that the apple is separate from the tree, which is separate from the branch.
Yes.
And what you're saying is it's okay to look at that level, but we must always find the linkage and get as close as possible to understanding the whole.
Yeah.
We will never be totally able to understand the whole, but we must always try and get as close as possible.
But it's worse than that. Because these numbers are swelling in diagnosis, we've created all these specialisms that don't talk to each other. So it's almost divide and rule or divide and conquer.
We've spoken before, you and I, to say, yes, of course, if you're going to put your family into someone who's doing a procedure, it's good for that specialist to have done that procedure many times.
Yes.
But before it gets to that,
Yes.
we need the general practitioner to all hail the general practitioner.
Exactly. And also, if we'd done something ahead, maybe we wouldn't have needed that procedure.
So speaking of GPs and how we must, all hail the GP and keep them at the centre really of understanding our health. You used to train GPs and used to be in the NHS for many years. What was your experience there?
So when I started in 1996, it was very much a holistic job. You looked after every element of the patient. You had a personal list.
Right.
So you would be on my personal list and it was my duty of care to look after you. And if I'm on holiday, there'd be a buddy looking after you. So we had a continuum. I saw you over time, understand the context, understand the family. As time has progressed and all these labels have turned up and the GP model's changing, you no longer get that continuity of care. So the same thing that's happening in hospitals, silo, is now happening in general practice. And our doctors who I train initially they were loving their jobs. Now they're finding it really hard because they go in and the computer tells them what to do. There's this pathway, there's that pathway, not in their control. And they find it really difficult because the patient doesn't come in with one thing. They come in with multiple things. And so we're seeing more anxiety. There's less motivation in them. A third are leaving the profession. So that's really bad.
So the criticism, we're in Mayfair.
Yeah.
And there is sometimes a criticism of doctors who work in nice places like Guildford and Esher and Mayfair. I'm only picking those at random. Because they're where you have offices. That perhaps you're just a doctor for the rich people of Mayfair. That is not your career, is it?
No.
You've experienced something very different.
No, totally. I mean, for me, root cause analysis, in making people aware that when their body talks to them, listen, is where I'm coming from. And ultimately, the biggest tool we have in medicine is a conversation. We could do millions of fancy tests, but I find that if you have an hour, 90 minutes with someone, you can put the story together. And the tests just confirm what you want.
And how does that contrast to your experiences? You started out in the NHS.
I did,
what was your role in your initial job?
I trained in hospital medicine and I became a partner in general practice. I'm still a partner in general practice. And essentially, I looked after a list of 2,500 patients early on in my career.
Which hospitals did you work in?
So I worked in Southampton, or the Southampton General.
I was there yesterday.
Yeah. It was a fabulous place. And then I worked in Winchester, in Poole, in Basingstoke, and then came back to Ealing Hospital, Hillingdon Hospital. Did a lot of work throughout all the specialisms, pediatrics,
I didn't know you worked in Hillingdon Hospital.
I did psychiatry there. Yeah.
My daughter, Natasha, her boyfriend, Sean, works in Hillingdon at the moment.
Oh, right. And, excellent. As a clinician? Or?
Actually, yes. Well, he's a senior physiotherapist assistant.
Fantastic.
So, yes, he's learning physiotherapy.
Yeah.
And maybe we could have a whole episode on it.
Yeah.
We could bring him on because he's trying to work out whether to train as a GP or not.
Yes.
So perhaps we can have a whole episode where he has a conversation with you about whether he should make that or not. Yeah. Should he go into something more directional like functional medicine? But that would be a fascinating conversation to bring Sean onto this podcast.
Integrated medicine.
Yeah.
And what I'm saying is that actually the narrative we're talking about in terms of root cause analysis, we've been trained in a conventional model. Sometimes it's harder to deconstruct these doctors to come into our world. And it's better to find people who've got passion and value, irrelevant to where they're coming from.
Right. So you trained GPs in the end.
Yes.
How did you... did you see a change in the type of GPs that were coming through the system, or what did you see?
So I've trained GPs for 24 years.
Right.
And through that, I must have trained about 70 to 80 GPs.
Right.
Initially, it was very vocational. We used to have a conversation, and ultimately, they're very happy with their jobs. They put the hours in. As time progressed, the computers began to tell us what to do. And they said, this symptom, this is the pathway, this symptom, this is the pathway. But unfortunately, patients don't come in with one thing. They come in with multiple things. And what I found over the last 10 years particularly, our GPs were getting very anxious. They were worried they'll miss something. They'll miss cancer. They spent a lot of time looking at the computer and not looking at the patient. And they were fretful, irritable. And then it led to people leaving. And I found that a lot of GPs were leaving to go into industry or just leaving the country. But also I noticed the number of GPs who were having neural diversity were coming through. And I'm thinking to myself, what's changed here? What's changed is that we've gone into a model where we put pathways in that have been dictated to by someone above, and our natural intuition was being suppressed. So doctors were no longer being able to put things into context. They just followed the computer.
If I look at trying to broaden that conversation out, a friend of mine is involved with the police, and his belief is that intuition cannot be trusted, that the system knows better, that when looked at in detail, it turns out intuition amongst police officers is wrong. And so I'm not saying he's right. I'm just saying I can understand, empathise with the fact that there is quite a big brother, technocratic, systematic push to end the use of intuition in policing and in medicine.
So ask yourself this question. I can only talk about medicine, not the police, but ask yourself this question. We've got all these wonderful pathways. We've got all these specialisms. So why is it that chronic disease is going up? Why is it that mental health is going up? Why is it that suicide's going up? Why is it that everybody has some sort of disease or disorder? And why is there so much unhappiness in society? If we were winning through these pathways and Big Brother approach, why are all these problems happening?
100%. And let's talk about the difference between NHS guidelines and evidence-based medicine. I know you've also challenged the RCT model as well, the randomized controlled trial model. However, my mum, she has had a fractured back. The only thing cured her, in addition to your help, was to go to India with the support of Gary Mota and to have some proper holistic care. It was amazing. But the doctor, again, wanted her to try for a third time something that hadn't worked before, which was to have a steroid injection in the spine. And we mentioned India. He said, well, that's obviously not within the NHS guidelines. And yet they were prepared to try something that hadn't worked before on her.
Interesting.
And that was in guidelines.
Yes.
So replicating, you must go against the anecdotal, the anecdotal experience of that patient.
Yes.
You're actually putting that secondary to some guidelines.
Yes, exactly.
And also guidelines are often cost-based and they're often lowest common denominator based.
Yes.
They're not necessarily scientifically based.
Totally, and that's exactly right. When we look at NHS guidelines, we need to talk about how that decision's made. So you have a board of people who sit there and they will say, this has come out in the papers, it looks like it's really good to help patients. We have 70 million patients in the country. How much would it cost to offer this? And if it goes outside the budget, it won't go into the guidelines. It doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means it's not affordable for a group of 70 million patients.
It's not systemically supported because of the
So
cost
things can't come in because it's cost-based. Now, rather than be honest and saying, this is great, but we can't afford it, it's not in the guidelines. So we basically tell doctors that anything that's not in the guidelines is bad. And this is the narrative that is preventing progress in the UK. The second thing to say is that sometimes the reference ranges that we have for testing is based on 70 million patients as an average. You're an individual, you have your own signature, you have your own context. What's going on in your life is
genes,
so different.
gut, context, relationships around me, situation at work.
Yes, and also age. All of these things are multifactorial. So how can you be treated by the same person in the next door room when you're totally different? Your experiences and everything are different. So guidelines are about prevalence-based medicine, populations. What longevity and regenerative medicine is about you as an individual.
So 3 issues with the guidelines. One, you talked about earlier, which is that they're not systemic. They don't look at the whole person.
Totally.
Secondly, that they're often cost-based.
Yes.
And thirdly,
Not often, they are cost-based.
They are cost-based and they're generically population-driven.
Totally population-driven.
Other than that, they're perfect.
If you're going to offer a service to a population, then you have to work on population guidelines. It's okay, I don't have a problem with that.
Let's not pretend.
But let's not pretend.
I mean, I spoke briefly about the meeting when Henry and I were doing the school food plan. We spoke with Public Health England, now called the Health Security Agency, somewhat ominously titled, I believe, in my view. And I said, look, you know that there are good fats and bad fats. We were challenging the eat well plate.
Okay.
And we were looking at the historic triangle pyramid they use in America, which we all know had carbohydrates on the bottom. We all know it was developed by the US Department of Agriculture, not by any medics. And then Harvard challenged that rightly, and they put exercise and relaxation on the bottom. Then they had actually good fats and vegetables on the bottom, the fat bit, the good bit, do more of this. And then they put bad fats at the top. And I said to Public Health England, why do you continue to say in the UK that all fats are bad? And they said, John, 2 things. One is the public are too stupid to understand the difference.
Goodness.
Secondly, we've always said that all fats are bad, so we're going to look stupid.
Yeah, well, there you go. Arrogance, ego. And this is our biggest issue. We're assuming the public are stupid. They are not. They're intuitive, and we're seeing it now. There's a groundswell of people electing to do things differently because trust is gone.
Someone once said, I've never met a wise professor, but I've met many wise farmers and fishermen. And I think that we need to, someone who we invite into our house to fix our boiler. I'm like, have you ever tried to fix a boiler?
Yeah.
Do you know what it is?
Totally
The wiring diagrams are not easy.
No,
and yet we don't trust plumbers and electricians to do their own health.
But these guys are grounded, they're real.
Absolutely.
They have intuition.
Absolutely.
Their brains have not been corrupted with paperwork and pathways
100%.
that have been manipulated by somebody else. So they're real people.
Some of the least enlightened people are sitting in offices within a system, not realizing they're in a system.
Yes. So I think, ego and arrogance is a big issue.
Yeah, it's a shame. It's a shame. So we're going to talk about fasting today because we wanted to anchor the conversation explicitly in that. You know so many things. You know about diagnostics, you know about how all of those different processes in the body link up. But we're going to anchor today in fasting. Please come back and talk to us more about everything else that you know. But let's talk about fasting today. So we're going to anchor it in a story, which is my experience. But before we speak about my experience, I think you want to provide some context, Ash, about the history of fasting and how fasting has developed through the story of our times. Talk to us about.
So fasting is not new.
Right.
You know, we're talking about now with intermittent fasting and all of these things, but fasting is not new. So if we go back to generations, if we go back to the Egyptians, they used to go into their caves and stop eating. We had the Greeks. Hippocrates said, if you feed the illness, you'll fuel the sickness. We had people like Pythagoras, the greatest mathematician in the world, who said he would never take a pupil unless they'd fasted for 40 days.
Wow.
Because all of these individuals believed that the clarity of mind, the cosmic energy, was based on cleaning out both mind, body, and soul. So fasting's been going on a long time. Wow. And then we've got the Hindus who regularly fast. You've got Jains who do an 8-day water fast every year. Ramadan, 30-day fasting, Lent. Yes. So this is built in history.
But don't forget modern Lent. You eat Easter eggs all the way through Lent.
Yes, see, because they're corrupted fasting.
Literally, it's gone the opposite.
Yeah. And even
I see people eating Easter eggs all Lent.
No, totally. So again, these guys were doing it. They didn't realize why. But if you look at the history, they said, we've got greater clarity of mind, we've got greater energy, greater sort of physical health too.
Yes.
So this is not new to us at all. So it's been going through the generations. And my interest in fasting came purely accidentally because I go and do a pilgrimage in India once a year. And for that, one of the things that I sacrifice is food and water. So I do a 24-hour dry fast. But what I noticed when I did that fast, I get the best sleep I ever get. I'm not a great sleeper, but that's the only night that I sleep well. So I made a link and then did some more research on it. And then it was a paradigm shift.
How old were you at this point?
That time I was 23.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was a long time ago. So then I looked at this and I looked at the work of various people and thought, goodness me, this is a game changer here. So I, in my mind, differentiated the word fasting from starving.
Right.
Because growing up, if you don't eat, you must be sick. If you don't have your breakfast, you're going to get ill. So all these conventional thought processes in your mind were so different to my experience of not eating. And then, of course, you had eating disorders sort of preventing you going in that direction. But I truly felt good. I was in the present. I was able to speak to people. It just felt good, and I slept well. I then looked at the science behind the fasting. And effectively, what I realized is that we were built for scarcity, not abundance. Your genes today are the same genes as in your genetics.
Tighter than they should be? I mean, what? You literally looked at them.
Are the same genes as they were 100,000 years ago.
Oh.
Where were you 100,000 years ago?
So they look like it.
Yeah.
Sorry,
and then a few million years before that, you're in the savannas, the deserts, where there would not be food for a few days. So you are built.
So we're built for a different environment.
Totally. So your genes are currently not happy where they are because they're built for that different environment. With that, inflammation occurs, distress occurs, and effectively people put on weight because their body's not being able to get rid of rubbish, and that feeds sugar production. And that sugar, if it's not used to run away from saber-tooth tigers, which is what it was meant to be, stores in fat. So, and then you get soggy, you get inflamed, you don't think clearly. So we have to empty out. And unfortunately, we live in abundance where we're constantly filling up. Now, we have larders in our body. We have something called glycogen, which is stored sugar in your muscles and your liver. And this is sugar. These are thousands of Mars bars sitting there that are igniting stress. Now, and then we have a second larder. You make 3.8 million cells every second. All cells don't go away. They sit in garbage cans in all of your 30 trillion cells in readiness for starvation.
Where do they sit?
They sit within the cell, splattered around.
So if it's a dead cell, where does that...
So
explain where this dead matter is.
So effectively, when you make new cells, the old cells get broken down into bits of protein.
Right.
And they basically embed themselves into the cell.
Right.
Now, they stay there, and they're getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and that cell's getting slower and slower and slower.
Gotcha.
And ultimately, your previous primordial self will have emptied that out because it may not have been food for 3 days. They would have digested that food.
And this is the process of autophagy.
Totally. Auto meaning yourself, phagy eating, so eating yourself.
Eating yourself, okay. Was there a symbiotic relationship between the body and those cells where they were providing fuel for the body. They were providing some calories. So as the cell broke down and those little bits were there, the body would literally use that for energy.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? So once you've emptied the sugar, you go into this world of autophagy, protein debris. So what happens is you get basically something called an autophagosome. This is a little thing that says, uh-oh, no food coming in. Let me go around the cell and see what sort of rubbish is lying around.
Have we identified these autophagosomes?
Yeah, totally, in science. So these autophagosomes go and find all the dead protein and bag it.
Right.
And then it mixes with something called a lysosome, which basically then is the recycling mechanism. So it takes all this dead, real dead stuff and recycles it into brand new DNA. It makes dead alive. The only thing in history that can do that. But more importantly, the combustion fuel of that process is energy. So not only does it recycle dead to life, it makes pure energy.
And
Isn't that
what's the
amazing?
form of that energy?
That energy is ATP.
That's the ATP process that we have.
So basically it gives the mitochondria the fuel to release ATP.
So we're going to do a whole program with you on ATP,
Yes.
which is the fundamental energy source within the body, right?
Yeah, totally.
And so
the only currency that matters.
So the only currency that matters, right?
Yeah.
Look, let's give us a little trailer for ATP. Let's not spend an hour on it. Let's do it in 60 seconds.
Yeah. So basically, for you to be alive and well, your cells need to be living and breathing. The only energy they do that with is ATP. So ATP creates cellular respiration.
Is there a chemical formula for ATP or what's it?
Adenosine trinucleotide polynucleotide. So there is a formula.
Of course it is. Okay. But it's fundamentally just carbon and hydrogen and oxygen at the end of the day.
Yes.
Yeah, but it's formed into something very magical through energy. And
now, ATP, if you could keep your ATP up forever, you'll live forever.
Right.
But the reality is it fades because of the external stresses. And then we go to second fuels, immune energy. Then when that runs out, we go to hormone energy. And then we go to cortisol.
Right.
So effectively, wrong energy, wrong place is the reason for decline and disorder.
Great. Okay, so we'll cut a whole program on that. Thank you for summarising it so bloody quickly. That's brilliant. So let's talk about the my story, my experience with fasting. Yeah. So Wendy, the acupuncturist, introduced us. I came to see you last May 24. I almost didn't come, and I did attend. A wonderful meeting with you. You then came on the Really Not Fighting podcast with Julian and myself, and you explained the idea that we have a reserve of glycogen and sugar. Yeah. We have a reserve of fat, but in between we have these proteins.
The garbage.
The garbage. I then was inspired to do what I thought was going to be a 3-day water-only fast, followed by another 11 days.
Yes.
Typical patient on a 3 and 11 day, 14 day, because I extended it a bit more.
You did.
What would a typical 2-week Ash Kapoor fast look like?
Right. So the first part of the fast is a 3-day without food. You can drink water, but no food. Now, what I say to my patients is, I've looked inside you, I've done a body composition index, I've seen how much is in your fat larder, in the sugar larder, so I know what's in your store cupboards, okay? So you are not starving. I tell people, please do not think you're starving.
That's fundamental.
It's fundamental because the psychology is very important.
Here.
So what I say to them, all you're doing is Sainsbury's and Waitrose are shut, you're just going into your closets and eating. You do it every day, so why not do it with your body? So a lot of them panic and I hold their hands for the first 3 days. The first day is usually boredom. They used to go and get a biscuit or a cup of coffee or a snack, and they miss that. So I tell them, I explain to them that's likely to happen day one. Day one, you're starting to empty the sugar. The Mars bars get used for energy because your brain's lazy and sugar's like microwave meals. So it says, he's going to eat tomorrow, let's just use these. Day two, the body starts panicking, thinking, hold on, he's serious. He's not putting food in the front of the fridge. So we're going to have to still keep going to the back of it. So by day 2 or 3, most of those Mars bars are emptied. And the brain's not silly, it won't let you die. So it says, okay, we've got all this garbage we've been accumulating for 50 years. Let's start biohacking that. So it starts emptying this protein, making brand new DNA and making energy. Most importantly, most people think that they're going to lose muscle mass in fasting, particularly men. I'm not fasting, so I'm going to lose my muscle mass. You don't lose muscle mass in a short fast. Reason? Your testosterone goes up 3 times. Your growth hormone goes up 500%. And why? Because your predecessor in the jungle needed to hunt or find food, water, shelter. So it says, eat everything, but don't eat its muscles. So this is a myth.
Preserves the muscle.
But eats the rubbish.
I think we need to really deal with this myth because there are a number of myths or counter arguments that you call myths that other people would call counter arguments which we will go through. But let's just deal with this one
Yeah.
in a little bit more slowly. Concern number one, you would say myth number one is that I will lose muscle during the process.
Yes, you will not lose muscle in a short fast.
What is short fast then?
So anything under sort of 5 or 6 days,
Right,
you're
okay.
not going to lose
Right.
muscle mass. Even
Okay.
up to 10 days, you're
Right.
not going to lose muscle
Okay.
mass. Certainly for 3 days, definitely not.
Right.
Scientifically, it's because these hormones
Thank
go
you for
up.
clarifying that.
And physically, it's because you're supposed to find food, water, shelter.
Right.
You can't lose muscle mass and find
Okay.
food, water, shelter.
Okay.
Long fast, when you've emptied the sugar larder and the debris larder,
It's
and
only
the
got
fat
one
larder,
choice.
then it has to find food from your muscles. But
Right.
we're not going to go
So
there.
a
'cause we're
very,
measuring-
very, very non-toxic, lean person with no fat, fasting for many weeks will deplete muscle.
Correct.
Fine.
But
But that's the last thing.
True.
But that's the last thing.
Yeah.
That's the last thing to go for.
Yes.
That's the
And
last
for
thing to
me,
use.
also, this is not just for people who are overweight. Even if you're slim, you're still holding
I think that's
this debris.
really important
So
to explain.
fasting
This is
is-
not a fat, not just a fat loss
It's
process.
a recycling of rubbish. It's a waste loss, not a weight loss.
So in a typical 2-week program, 3 days no food.
So what happens in
water
that 3
only.
days? You'll
Yeah.
finish your Mars bars and you'll start biohacking this debris. But at the same time, the brain's not stupid. It has a duty to keep you alive. It says, this guy's serious. We better now go and look for the fat. It's like allotment. It's got to biohack fat. So whilst you're emptying the protein out, it starts biohacking fat. People lose weight watching television because the body's using fat for food. And guess what? Your brain's made of fat. So once it takes this fat, it feeds the brain before your body. And your dopamine, your hunger just goes. And you feel calm,
Explain
you
that
feel
again.
zen. You've got fat around your organs. So once you've emptied the
do.
sugar and the protein, it'll find this fat. It'll break it down, create
in order
nutrition.
to provide it for the brain.
Yeah, and the body.
Right. So when you say the brain is made of fat, you're not saying that your body is using the brain. You're saying what all of
The
the
brain cells are made of fat,
So therefore-
they like fat.
and they use
Yes.
they send your organ fat to the brain.
Totally correct.
Got it.
And when your brain is fed properly, the dopamine levels stabilize. So
yeah.
ADHD, people who are just wired, they just calm right
I'm
down.
going to come back to that in my story.
Yeah. So then the body gets fed. So you lose your hunger, And remember, we're watching the levels in the larder dropping, and we can tell you when to stop fasting. So ultimately, this is medically supervised. The other myth is when you're doing this, you're going to lose minerals and vitamins.
Yes.
That's correct. That's true. But what we do is we have ways of giving those minerals and vitamins during that prolonged fast. So we're feeding the cell, but taking the macronutrition, the big food, from your body. So we get over that myth too. So it's really important to realize that it is not dangerous if it's done properly and in a methodical way. And our predecessors have done it for thousands of years.
There are a couple of other potential myths.
Yes.
One is I'm going to put all the weight back on straight away. That's another concern. In fact, hasn't happened to me. Tell me a little bit about that myth, if it is a myth.
Have you seen people who just look super healthy all the time? They're no better than you. When you do this process of cleaning out the sugar, cleaning out the debris, and biohacking your fat, you're changing your whole hardwiring to a different system. And what will happen is all these receptors that were full of toxicity, inflammation, swelling have opened up. So your radars will be up. So when you eat something bad or too much sugar, you'll feel bloated. You won't sleep at night.
Absolutely.
You'll feel
I've experienced that
rubbish.
over many
And
years, yeah.
when you're used to feeling great, it becomes addictive.
What's happening in your body? First of all, psychologically, you become attached to the good feelings, and then you don't want them to go away. Is there also a change in your gut microbes where they start to want to feed and send you the right signals to want to feed on better food?
Remember we started this conversation, you're connected. When you do a fast, every 30 trillion cell benefits. So your gut works better. Your defense systems work better. Your brain is calmer.
So they want to reward you
Totally.
and convince you to continue with
Yes.
that.
But also they will beat you up when you eat the wrong food. So your body's now working with you. And ultimately that feel-good factor supersedes everything else.
Okay, when you say supersedes everything else, what about this idea of the starvation idea that your body's going to go, God, finally food, let's get fat back on us?
It doesn't happen
Okay.
because you've changed your hardwiring.
Right.
Your body's already been fed with fat.
Right.
It's already been fed with all the things. Your insulin resistance drops.
And we'll come back to it, but it's actually using ketones.
Yes.
And so therefore it is getting fat.
Yeah.
Through the process.
so
It
you-
has been receiving fat.
Totally. So you're not starving. You're fasting. You're basically going into your internal larders and eating. But more importantly, you're recycling rubbish. So when you remove all the rubbish in the system, everything works to a very nice level. And therefore, you don't want to go back. And also, the body won't let you go back.
I want to come back to the caveman analogy because there's some controversy over that. A friend of mine who's in biotech said, I don't buy the whole caveman thing because I used to die at age 25. So we're going to come back to that, right?
But ask why they died. They died of typhoons, floods, communicable diseases. Medicine's done great in getting rid of those, but we replaced it with chronic disease.
So I think the argument back is that the metabolic diseases within cavemen were, those
they didn't have
the metabolic diseases are modern.
Yeah, they totally are.
I think that's the answer. So the story was this. We did the podcast. You explained that the autophagy process.
Yes.
I had read before a book which I mentioned in the We're Not Fighting podcast, which was called The Pleasure Trap.
Yes.
All about the True North Clinic in Canada, I think it is, where they put people on a 10-day water fast. So I'd always been intrigued by A, how bloody difficult that would be, and B, how powerful it seemed to be on blood pressure, diastolic and systolic, both measures. And so I was always had that in the back of my mind. And then when you said that there was a 2-week thing that you did with 3 days, starting with no food, I thought, wow, I'm going to really have to psych myself up. And Wendy, who introduced us, said, John will go away, let's do it in December. And then she said, I can't go away in December, John, I'm going to have to do it in January. And I waited till January, and she said, oh, John, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to do it in April. You said, you don't have to go away.
No.
You can literally start this week.
Yes.
Nowhere special.
No.
You don't have to be Jesus and go away for 40 days, however long you went away for.
No.
And you said, just do it.
Yes.
And you said, decide when your last meal is. And it was based on the day for IVs. Thursday night it was. Decide when your last meal is. Remind yourself, you do not need food. And you got 72 Mars bars. I don't know whether how precise you were with my Mars bars. I think it was something you said to all the boys. But you have 72 Mars bars in your body that you can feed off.
Yeah.
That psychology was really, really important.
Yes.
And I have to say, Ash, it's to repeat, it is not just your medical knowledge that makes you special. It's the fact that we know you're an Enneagram 2, you do genuinely care about people. You're not just here to have a nice car, although I quite like your car. Can I borrow it? You are here to genuinely help, and I know that from you. I know that is genuinely true. I cannot stress enough how important that psychology is. How do you know that? Because you studied, you were interested in psychology as a young age.
Yes,
is that
I
why?
Was.
Or
well, I guess the thing is when you see thousands of patients in your journey in medicine, and remember, I did nights and days and everything. There was just layers and layers of information just coming through. And what I did notice, for the difference between those who got better and those who didn't, is their mindset. And then I did some courses on psychology and the impact of manifestation and the limbic system.
Wow.
And I was gobsmacked when I saw some of the research on how your mind, when it thinks positively, it sends positive channels down and it can heal, it can fix. So when you tell your brain you are not starving, the brain will tell the body, we're not starving. And it totally changes your relationship to food just by that thought process, you see. And this is real. It's scientifically proven that the sympathetic nervous system will send channels down to you. And if you're in a negative state, it doesn't matter. Those negativities can create a different environment altogether.
can you look at either the cameras and just tell people watching this that they can do this the same way that you did with me?
Yes.
I think just tell them, look at the camera and tell them.
Yes. So effectively, we've looked inside your body. We've seen that you've got X amount of Mars bars in your sugar larder, 10 kilos of meat in your protein debris, and about 20 kilos of fat. So we know your larders are full. You will not be starving. Now, it's really important to tell your body that because effectively, when you're not eating, all you're doing is simply not feeding the front of the larder. You're not starving. So it's the same as you would do if the shops were shut. You would simply go to your fridge, to the cupboards and eat the food. That is what your body's doing. But most importantly, the body will find the rubbish in you. It'll recycle the rubbish that is going to cause harm, illness, decline and disorder in the future and recycle it into brand new DNA, brand new cells, and produce energy as a consequence of this. So not only are you eating from your larders, you're cleaning up all the rubbish and potentially warding off things like dementia, heart disease, blood pressure, and possibly even cancer. So not only is this necessary, you're built for it. It's a design in your biology because your predecessors were doing it all the time over the millions of years, and your cells still belong in the savannas and the deserts. That is why this works.
Thank you, Ash. And I think the psychology and the psychological support you gave me was key. So I decided when my last meal was, I had 72 Mars bars and I did not need food. And I think you start to realize how psychological eating is, because we are so programmed to think we need 3 meals a day. In fact, if we're not having snacks and we're having 3 meals a day, that's seen as success.
Yes.
Oh, well, you didn't snack today.
Yeah.
You just had your main meals.
Yes. Yes.
Whereas actually, often in nature, we maybe didn't have a meal for 3 days.
No, but worse than that, John, in nature, you may be walking 20 kilometers a day as part of normality. If you actually analyze your day, you're sitting in a car, in an office. You are not only not needing the food, those calories that your predecessors had were used much more with less of it around. So you're built for scarcity. We're not moving, we're eating too much, and we're causing our bodies to decline.
We should role model this. We should get up and just move, genuinely.
Yeah.
Because I think even to show someone, I've actually entangled myself here, but I think, let's say we're sitting at a desk, and we may not use this. So our spinal fluids stop if we're sitting down. Yeah. Sitting is the new cancer.
Yeah,
so we should role model this and actually get up right now. What should we do? Just for a minute of...
So for me, my view would be that if you're sitting for more than 30 minutes a day, set your alarm, get up, do something that's moving. Go and do 10 sit-ups, 10 press-ups, 10 squats, and effectively get the body moving. Because you're absolutely right, sitting is the new, effectively, cause of cancer.
And so if many of us are working at home, it's a good idea to, as you say, work for maybe 25 minutes concentrated.
Yes.
Set an alarm, 5 minutes of activity. We're not going to do a full 5 minutes now, but...
No. But ask yourself, if you did this in a 10-hour working day, 5 minutes every hour, it's 50 minutes. You don't need to go to a gym. 50 minutes throughout the day of movement is what is needed.
Great point. Well, thanks for allowing us to do that. Yeah. So my experience was this. The first night, it was it's 24 hours in, I went around to Toby and Christina's house, and they had arranged a feast where everyone had brought their own beautiful main course. Everyone had brought the most amazing dessert, and I had to sit there and have Celtic salt in water.
Yeah.
And then a week later, I had to go around Mark and Sarah's house, and they love their food. They'd done the same torture trick to me, and I had to sit there. Do you know what I did?
Yeah.
I went to their bookshelves. I took out their best cookbooks, read them because I was so distracted. ADHD, read them, and I just ordered the cookbooks, thinking soon I will be able to cook from these.
Yes.
And I had to not eat. But let me tell you what the experience was like for me. So I started with the idea of doing 3 days.
Yes.
I think I rang you and said, would you support me? Got the text. Actually, I've maybe called the text actually. Yeah. Would you support me to do another 2 days to 5? And you said, yes, if you're feeling good.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely.
I then I came in on day 4 and had the IV drips, which we're going to come back to. A strange thing happened to me, which is not strange because I think everyone that does it, which is after about 2 days, sometimes 3 for people, my glycogen had got out of my system.
Yeah, the Mars bars had left you.
Mars bars had left. And what I experienced was the most incredible feeling of energy.
Yes.
The most incredible feeling of clarity. And no excruciating hunger.
No.
To the extent that I started feeling a fraud. Because people were like, I'm so impressed by your willpower on day 5.
Yes.
And I was thinking, it's not that hard.
No. And again, this is a conventional narrative that's got stuck in our brains and society. You are eating. And now you're eating the best food ever because your body's biohacking and creating from scratch.
I think my wife, who is used to me having ADHD, she's used to it, well, she loves it, but she's used to having ADHD, me having ADHD. And she said that I was the calmest that I'd ever been.
Yeah, because for the first time, your brain was not feeding on sugar, it was feeding on what it wanted, fats, made by yourself.
I'm just really thinking about it now and how powerful that was and important for her. And people think, oh my God, is he being a nightmare? Is he being hangry?
Yeah.
And Katie was like, it's actually unbelievable. He's the calmest he's been for decades.
Yeah. Yeah.
Explain what that is. You just explained a little bit about that, but at a sort of more chemical level or energetic level, what's happening?
Yeah. So ADHD to me is just the way the brain's working. Effectively, most people will think about 2 or 3 things at one time. Someone with ADHD can think of 50 things at the same time. Now, they're using all these things. It takes energy. Your brain is using energy. Now, essentially, what it also is doing is sending impulses down to the brain, thinking, I've got 50 TV sets on my head. We must be stressed. So, of course, the sympathetic nervous system tells the body to be stressed. So what does it do? It makes cortisol, which makes sugar. Now, the brain wants fat, but when sugar's there, so not only does it create fight or flight, it fuels it even worse. What you did through the fast was basically empty the sugar sort of larder out altogether. So cortisol didn't have anything to ignite anymore.
Incredible.
You then cleaned out the debris, the combustion fuel from your brain, so you're not feeding bad cells anymore. They've been eaten, cannibalized almost through the fast. And then it biohacks fat. Now remember, your brain is made of fat, so it eats fat. So you were feeding your brain correctly, which is where the calmness came from. And then what happens is the dopamine regulates.
In my experience of having ADHD, what you're saying is that I'm looking for stimulation. I'm looking for dopamine hits, and and I'm constantly looking for greater highs,
new risk, because that's where you thrive.
Yes, it was interesting that we as ADHD people we seek in some sort of stimulation.
Yes.
And I'm addicted to online chess, and I have to sort of like not do that.
But what is interesting, the ADHD mind thrives under pressure. Okay. So when there's a total catastrophe, these guys fix it.
Oh, and that's really interesting.
They feel calmer under that.
That's really interesting because I came back from the first day of lockdown, and that whole industry was shutting down, and I'd been taking someone on a helicopter for a meeting to try and sort out the industry supply chain, our supply chain. They'd landed back and they'd said to me, "Oh, John, we're not going to use this champagne." So I had a bottle and a half bottle of champagne or 2/3 bottle of champagne on the way back. And I was just getting back thinking, what the hell is happening to the world? And then I got a text from my Otti, my assistant, saying, "John, we're all waiting for you." I'm like, who's waiting for me? What do you mean? So I just sat there and thought, I don't know what she's talking about. And she said, no, we're all waiting for you. We're on Teams. And I was like, well, we're on Teams. Who's on Teams? And I turned the computer on and it went, there are 350 people in this meeting. Whoa. And they're all looking at me. And they're thinking, and they said, "John, tell us what's happening. What are we going to do?" And I realised it was all the senior people at Leon. Earlier that day, I'd arranged a Teams meeting with all of them.
Yes.
And I literally went into, as ADHD, I literally went into
hyper-focus.
By the way, I have many weaknesses, right? So this isn't, I'm bloody genius. But I was able in that stress moment to literally say, here's what's happening in the industry, here's the 3 things we're going to do, and here's everyone's role.
Yes.
And I think, honestly, we realise that in a tribe, it's the ADHD people that see the crisis first.
Yes.
Everyone else is farming.
Yeah. Yes.
And they saying there's something bad coming.
Yes.
Exactly. Or within antelopes or whatever. And that's the role of an ADHD person.
Totally. And Churchill the same. Yeah.
Leonardo da Vinci apparently.
Same.
Not
These
that
guys
like
are frontline people.
But
normal life.
Yeah.
The brain gets bored. Yeah. And hence you fill it with addiction, you fill it with other behavior because that dopamine is not coming.
Well, there's an excellent song about ADHD called ADHD, which we're going to come back to another time.
But the great thing about the fast you did was you stabilized that.
Okay,
you
so that's what
gave
happened.
The brain food. So I think these young children who are being fed on sugar and wine,
it's getting worse.
It's not, but we're making it worse.
And they're putting them in effectively prison-like structures in schools.
Totally.
And giving them sugar.
Yes.
And no wonder they're ending up trying to run away.
Yeah. Do you know about the right and left side of the brain?
A little bit, but tell me more.
This is really important. This is really important.
I've done some work on the cerebellum and the role that plays between the two, but please tell us more.
So as a child, when you grow up, you use the right side of the brain. You look at your parents, you look at behaviour,
that's
you learn
intuition,
how to walk.
Is it? Or
purely, intuition, perception.
Yeah.
So you learn from intuition, perception. The left side of the brain is logical, the right side is biological. Now, intuition, perception sits in the right side. Right. Then we go to school and we learn 1 + 1 = 2, 3 + 3. Now, that information, how useful is that in the jungle or the savannah? It isn't, right? So we're putting stuff in the left side of the brain because of conventional structures. Yeah. But actually, it's the right side that is perceptive. Now, the belief is that most ADHD are right-sided thinkers. Okay. They make the invisible visible.
Yes.
The left side is about process and keeping status quo going.
Interestingly, where does emotion sit in the right or left?
Both.
Okay, exactly. Okay,
There's a connection called the corpus callosum, and most people can switch between the two.
Well, what I was fascinated by in Jungian psychology, and what he said was the brain can work in ones and noughts logic is true or false. The heart works in likey or no likey, lighty or no lighty. Do I like that or not like that? Those are left, right, binary, yes, no, one, naught decisions, both at the emotional level and at a logic level. But this can see the whole picture, and it can get closer to the Tao.
Absolutely right.
Closer
Do you know
to
why?
the whole. Please.
When your gut was made and your brain was made, they came from the same genome. It was split in two. One became gut, one became brain.
Right, so they're kind of linked.
They are not. They are
the same
absolutely
thing.
linked. Every thought you've had today goes to your gut before anywhere else. So the gut-brain axis is so powerful. So gut feel, all of these terms have come from that.
100%. Well, and that's another episode. So I have to say, what happened to me was not just the support of you, but the support of my wife and my kids. I mean, perhaps some people watching this are going to go on a fast. Perhaps some people watching this are going to support others to go on a fast. In your experience, I can tell you my experience, it was quite important to have that support from my family.
Yes.
Have you experienced that as well?
Totally. Yeah. Because remember, most of this is about the psychology.
Yes.
We know you're not starving.
Yes.
We can tell you're not starving.
Yeah.
So we know that the biologics are fine.
Yeah.
But it's about this brain, about what people have told you over decades and years. And if your team around you are worrying, anxious, it's going to come onto you.
Yeah.
So to have good support, somebody who's reinforcing this is really powerful.
So big shout out to my wife Katie and to my mum Marion, my daughter Natasha, and to Sean actually, who despite having some medical knowledge supported me in it as well, my daughter's boyfriend. So that support's important. What was very important for me, it was about day 6. I said to you, God, or day 7, I can't remember. I said, Ash, I think I'm going to have something to eat. And you said to me, can you give me one more day?
Yeah.
There's the Hacksaw Ridge is a film about a medic who went in to be a medic because he was a pacifist, he didn't want to use a gun, and he rescued so many people. He went back and said, one more injured person. I've subsequently looked at trying to do, looked at another 10-day fast. And what I realized is what was important was that I didn't set out to do a 10-day fast.
No, absolutely right.
I set out to do a 3-day fast, and then it went to 5, and then it went to 7.
Yes.
So what advice can you give people about that psychology of how to manage that?
Yes. So I guess the key thing here is you don't know how good you're going to feel at the point you start. And often we're dealing with irrationality, fear at the beginning. And I know the brain will change on day 2, day 3, day 4, but you won't know that. So ultimately what we're doing is working with a bigger bandwidth each day of fasting. So rather than frighten people and say it must be 5 days, 7 days, I say, we should do 2 or 3 days because we know we're going to get there. And then I touch base with them with the view to seeing if they could extend, and 90% extend.
Okay,
90%
incredible.
Because the psychology is evolving.
Well, I hope that's not too much of a spoiler for people, but it is possible to do that. As part of is it the Nomad fast?
Nomad plans,
There are IV drips on day 4 and day 11 that I found very beneficial, just for full disclosure. But is it, I'm going to ask it slightly differently, is it possible for someone not to have those drips?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes,
So remember, you're eating your macronutrition, i.e. the fat, the protein from within you, but they don't have the minerals or vitamins in them, right? So effectively, by giving you the drips, we're giving you the vitamins and minerals to feed your cells without giving you the calories.
Right.
So that's why we do the drips. Can you do it without it? Of course you can. The African boy who doesn't eat for 3 days doesn't have drips. The Aborigines who go on treks don't eat for 2 or 3 days. They don't have drips. The drips are about our modern life where everyone needs to get things done quickly. They don't have time. They're business meetings, etc. So it speeds up the process. Outside the drips, we do something called nanocell technology, where we give you vitamins through the mouth, so you can get it absorbed.
It's an alternative to the drips.
There's an alternative to the drips.
Can you just explain what I have? So I had spermidine.
Yes. So you
That
had
actually has something to do with sperm.
is
something found in sperm?
No, actually, it's made by your gut. It's called spermidine.
Okay,
But essentially, the first drip you had was about maintaining autophagy, encouraging your body to keep biohacking fat and protein. So we gave you spermidine, which you make in your gut. But remember, all that gut's broken, right? So we're not making spermidine. And spermidine induces autophagy. It says to the brain, keep going.
Autophagy,
We give you the minerals. So effectively, when you moved all those Mars bars, they were a sponge to water. So you lost a lot of water. It wasn't the water that's the problem, it's the minerals in them. So we give you hypertonic salines or Celtic salts to take. In the drip, we give you minerals.
Right.
We give you something called alpha lipoic acid, which helps biohack fat around your liver. So the first drip is about pushing that agenda quicker. So the drips will get you there quicker, but you don't need them.
Got it. Thank you. So what did I feel? I felt great. My blood pressure went down. And I think for those people wanting to challenge my body composition, we use the in-body scales, which I think are relatively proven to be relatively accurate.
They are, yes.
On certain measures. There's a whole bunch of measures that in-body do. They give you a total score, which is your in-body overall score, but they also things like water, protein, minerals, body fat.
Yeah.
So my body fat at the spot, my weight at the start was 112 kilograms. By the end of the process, it had gone down to 103.8 kilograms. And interestingly, my fat had gone down 9 kilograms, and my muscle had gone from 45.3 kilograms all the way down, joking, up to 45.9.
There you go.
So I think that number there, let's just repeat that. My muscle, the big concern here is that muscle is depleted.
Yes.
You explained rationally why you didn't think that happens. And the numbers say that my muscle had gone from 45.3 to 45.9. So it had gone up.
So to summarize, you didn't eat, your muscle mass went up and your fat went down. So two things. One, testosterone. Second thing is your original testosterone, which was basically working on cells that had puddles and inflammation on it, couldn't get in. You'd removed all that. So your existing testosterone could work better.
Okay.
So
and there's a growth hormone.
Absolutely, growth hormone as well. So everything is heightened and you're cleaned out. So you're effectively, even after the fast, you'll find that your muscle mass will continue to get better.
So one of the things that you encouraged me to measure was something I never even heard about. Yeah. And in fact, having researched it a lot since, I'm astounded that many medics don't know about it, which is the GKI, the glucose to ketone index. We're going to have to first of all deal with what ketones are, but very quickly, just in case people need to come up to speed on glucose as well, glucose is the amount of glucose in our blood, as measured in the UK, we measure it in, what's the measure?
Millimoles per litre.
Millimils per litre, mmol. And then ketones. Let's discuss those, because you hear some people, 4 or 5 years ago started going on ketone diet. People still do it, but explain exactly what a ketone is.
Yeah. So before I go to ketones, let's talk about glucose.
Please,
Basically, what a glucose ketone index is a measure of your glucose and a measure of your ketones, which we're going to talk about. And it gives me an idea of what your body's using for energy right now. Okay. And in the majority of people, they're using sugar, not protein or fat. So a glucose ketone index is a measure of what energy you're using. What is a ketone? A ketone is a byproduct of fat. So if you're biohacking fat, the byproduct of it's called ketones. So if your ketone count's going up, it means you're using fat for energy. So by measuring those two things, we can show you transferring from the Mars bars into fat. And that ratio is what we're looking at.
I'm going to talk about the ratio. I'm not going to talk about it. You're going to, fortunately, don't worry, you're going to talk about the ratio. We're going to talk about the ratio. But a specific question on ketones, which is, first of all, there's not just one type of ketone, is there? It's a family.
Yes.
And that family of ketones, what are the specific examples of ketones? Do you know, is it worth asking that in terms of, when you prick your finger and you measure ketones, you're measuring a particular type of ketone. So it's a marker.
Yeah, you're using the ketone you're measuring, and the ketones that our units measure is actually the byproduct of fat metabolism.
Right. Okay.
That's the one that matters.
So, is it that your body is using ketones, or it's just a measure that your body is using fat?
Correct. The latter. It's using fat, and the combustion fuel is a ketone.
Right. And so your body isn't in any way using those ketones for fuel.
No.
It's just a byproduct of the fat. That's good to clarify.
Yeah.
The glucose to ketone index then, or someone walking around having had 3 meals a day, what would their ketone level be? What would their glucose level be? And what would therefore their GKI be? Typical person walking around having stopped at the garage for some Smarties.
Okay. So the typical person would basically have a glucose of maybe 6 or 7 and a ketone count of 0.1 if they're quite healthy. So that means their glucose divided by ketone is about 60 or 70, right? Now that is the majority of people out there. And some have no ketones. So their glucose ketone is infinite.
Yeah.
So if you're healthy, it's around then, but most are actually purely on glucose. 95% of our patients are just on glucose, 0 ketones. So they're purely biohacking the Mars bars. And why? Because it's easy food for the brain. So very few are in ketosis.
What I experienced I turned up on day 4, you pricked my finger and I was 1.9. I think that was a little bit low for day 4. You'd expect me to be at 2.5 or maybe 3.
Yes,
is that fair?
yes. So you had more
4?
Mars bars than
Right.
most. So the body was
I
still
think
emptying
that's probably
out.
very fair.
So it can only go to the fat larder once the sugar's used.
And
up.
I think it's just to be clear, me having more Mars bars was not me having more fat.
No.
It was literally sugar.
Glycogen.
It was the glycogen. So I think I do run on quite a high glycogen level. I think in general,
Yeah, no,
I think
you do.
Yeah,
But this is important. It's not you're a bad eater.
Yeah.
When you have ADHD, you're making cortisol, which makes you become a donut-making factory.
what I did, we'll come back to this another time. I did a sort of like one of those 4-week, constant glucose monitoring, and I just by getting up in the morning, I went to like 7.2, and I had nothing to eat.
Yeah, totally.
So that is literally my cortisol making my liver and my muscles create glucose from glycogen, right?
Totally.
And it's the cortisol that drives it, because it says you're under attack.
Yeah, totally.
Well, getting up in the morning is pretty bloody scary sometimes. And I noticed that when I did when I was lucky enough to have some like a hot bath or sauna, it went up because that's stress.
It is totally.
I played tennis.
Yeah.
And it went right up.
Totally. Everything like that is
put it right up.
Yeah, exactly.
So what's happening there is your body's suddenly producing
Yes.
glucose from glycogen.
And because it's there in the stored product.
Yeah.
If it's not there, it won't happen.
And when
you'll
you're
turn to fat.
stressed at night, your body craves sugary foods because it's like, I'm going to be stressed. I'm going to be under attack.
Yes.
An email comes in. Something stressful happens, and therefore stress is creating lack of sleep and stress are creating the propensity of your body to take on more sugar,
100%.
more carbohydrate.
Totally.
Fine.
If you're not sleeping, it's because cortisol's there.
Yeah.
Cortisol should not be there after 9 o'clock.
Right.
They did a study on men doing a 9 to 5 job in the day, and the same men doing 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Night workers, day workers, same food. Same sleep times, except
Was it deliberately men, or you just
they chose
people?
men because
it was just because they wanted to not get the variation. Yeah.
The guys who did night work were 6 kilos heavier than the guys who did the day work. Same job, same food.
Circadian rhythms, hormone imbalances, stress,
sugar,
cortisol
was made, and also they had more anxiety and more depression.
Okay, let's. So by the end of the process, I'd gone into what you call reverse GKI.
Yeah, you were brilliant.
Which was my ketones were higher than my glucose.
Yes.
My glucose was 3.9.
Yeah.
And my ketones were 4.5.
So you were then biohacking
Less than 1.
fat
Yeah.
for your majority of your nutrition.
And
what a fantastic place to be.
More importantly, autophagy really accelerates
Absolutely.
at that less than 1. So am I right in thinking that less than 2 or less than about 1.8 is really powerful, but to get less than 1, that's a really powerful
Very unique. A majority of our patients run between 2 and 3. The ones who are in proper autophagy will be at just under 2. But if you're under 1, you're in reverse ketones.
Am I right in thinking that there is nascent research, we need to be clear about how nascent it is, that's very potentially good at clearing cancer cells? Is that what do we know about that or not
ask
know
yourself
about that?
this. If the body is trying to find protein, it will find anything within you that shouldn't belong to you. Right. So it will biohack bacteria. It'll biohack skin.
Bad bacteria it doesn't need.
Yeah.
And it recognizes we need to come out episode, but it recognizes the bacteria that's bad, totally. That it doesn't need.
The body knows what's in it and what shouldn't be in it, but you have to force the issue.
Okay.
So there are reports where cancer cells are going in the wrong direction that autophagy will mitigate at an early stage. And there's some centers in Southeast Asia that rely on autophagy for this.
And I do believe that there is very promising research around brain tumors.
Yes.
In particular, and GKI management.
Absolutely.
And maybe even to support chemotherapy, but someone should speak to the caveats apply.
Yeah, but equally, cancer feeds on sugar.
Right.
Logic. Get rid of the sugar, it's got no food to eat.
I once wrote an article for the Metro quoting a Nobel Prize winner saying that sugar was linked to cancer, and Sense About Science, an organisation that turned out would be partly funded by Coca-Cola, organised a bit of a Twitter campaign against me. Yeah. So that's the whole episode we're going to do on Sense About Science. So so thank you for that. My blood pressure was down significantly. Thank you for that. And I think you predicted that at the time.
Blood pressure is reactive. Remember
especially
fight or
ADHD
fly?
Type person,
You've got a saber-tooth tiger behind you. You need that pressure to run. The body does the same thing.
When we're exercising, if I were to do a VO2 test or an exercise, you would see my blood pressure going up and up and up, and that's a good thing, right?
Yeah, it is a good thing.
So all it is we're not regulating it to come to normalise.
Because you're in fight or flight all the time when sugar's around.
And when we're doing weights or running or whatever, sprinting, our blood pressure goes high anyway.
It is.
But we're not allowing it to go down.
Correct.
That's what's happening.
That's the difference.
Okay.
Pressure is supposed to go up in situations, but as long as it comes down.
And is it fair to say that we'll do a whole session on blood pressure, but there are different causes, and it can be a reactive blood pressure situation, but it also could be arterial and other things that renal.
Autophagy has found that whoever has come in, that we've stopped their benefit.
Thank you. The benefits of fasting. We have our immune system benefit, the autophagy, we have our hormone balance, we have a metabolic impact, stem cell production seems to go up.
Everything cleans out. If you're currently under stress, you have to make more cells to deal with it. When your body's in balance, it doesn't have to work so hard. We shouldn't say, what does it help? We should say, what doesn't it help? It absolutely helps every condition: metabolic conditions, musculoskeletal conditions, brain conditions, heart conditions, liver conditions. There's not a single thing that autophagy cannot help, because we're built, we're designed for it.
What if someone would like to compare the different ways of fasting? So they'll say, right, that's all very well, but I'm going to do 1 meal a day, or I'm going to do 5-2.
Yeah.
What are the variations? Because does a 2 or 3 day fast deliver a greater autophagic cleansing benefit than an intermittent fast?
Totally. If you put your body into a state of not feeding the front of the fridge, it is forced to eat more from the back. So by definition, you get a greater autophagy by just simply
But there is
fasting.
still some benefits in the intermittent fasting, but just it doesn't get beyond that 48-hour threshold that's key to have nothing. And I think that's what's important.
Yes, and you've got to ask yourself, most people do intermittent fasting is to lose weight. Autophagy is about losing the waste. This is a scientific medical recycling. And what I feel is that often we all have too much backlog. So in my mind, intermittent fasting will never quite be enough. Have the full clean out, have the deep clean of your fridge, and then do the intermittent fasting to feed the front of it.
There's someone told me a story, it's an analogy, which is, I've got a building site, I've told you this before, I've got a building site, and if we're constantly getting new stuff delivered from the local builders merchants, we're not using up the old bits of brick or cement or paint that we've got left over. And you go into my garage, I'm sure you've got loads of half-used pots of paint. And I think that's what we've got in us, haven't we? There's half-used pots of paint that are drying up that we need to get rid of.
And ask yourself this, why most diets fail is because we don't change the hardwiring of the body. What autophagy does is change the hardwiring of the body. So intermittent fasting can fail because the world's pressures are still there. But when you do the autophagy, you've cleaned out.
And I think there's something very important about recognizing the fact that structure matters, the environment that we're in. So when people go to these health farms, they find it easier because they are in that structured environment. You encourage me to replace that structured environment with a decision, with almost a hypnosis, a programming, a decision. So by making that decision, by having the support of our families, by knowing that we don't have to eat, we're giving ourselves a mental framework.
We certainly are. And
that almost substitutes that physical framework.
And you're doing it in the environment you live in. So it's no longer the resort that got you better. No longer the pill.
That's very important.
You did it in your own environment.
Because otherwise you're subliminally hypnotizing yourself to go back into the bad habits. But if those good habits have happened in your normal environment, then you're changing your perception of your normal environment. And that's really important. And your house and your work.
Why this always works is we're working with your DNA and cell journey. You're a mammal, so we're working with science, not nurture or culture.
Let's just end, if we can, on some of the things you can do to support a fasting process, to maximize ketosis, to minimize cortisol. They would be, let's just list them. It would be more sleep,
Totally.
some gentle walking
Yes.
or exercise.
Yes.
And in fact, I recently did a 3-day fast where I did some weights and I did a couple of zone 2 sessions for an hour, and that really did help my ketosis.
Yeah.
So I think over a 3-day fast, you can actually up the weight, the exercise a little bit more as well.
One
If
would
you're
do HIIT
feeling okay,
exercises.
not HIIT.
HIIT, anything non-HIIT is fine.
Right, so that means zone 2, which is 75% heart rate, or a little bit of gentle weights,
Absolutely.
yoga, things like that.
It
is
all
fine.
helps. It's also a
Certainly
great distraction.
It certainly is. How often should one fast? Because let's take like a 10-day fast, no more than 3 times a year, would you say?
Yeah, I think look at the environment you live in.
Yeah.
If you're in a big environment of stress, you're going to start accumulating debris quicker than others. So I say to people, once you've done the big fast, you own it forever. So a lot of my patients every month do a 36-hour water fast, 2 sleep cycles in a day. So you go to bed tonight, you don't eat all day tomorrow, you go to bed and you eat the next day. So effectively, it's your spring clean that keeps things going every month. Essentially, that is all you need to stay where you are.
Okay, so am I doing too much? Because I did the 10-day in February.
Yeah.
I did 3 days this week, and I really benefited from that.
Yes.
Is that okay?
So
or would
in
you
your
recommend
case,
that I don't do that?
No. So in your case, what I would do is look in your fat larder inside and say, John, you've got another 15 kilos of
certainly
larder.
do. Certainly do,
So ultimately, you can do it 10 days safely,
Okay.
but we've got to keep the vitamins and minerals going.
The question about eating disorders and whether us talking about fasting potentially feeds those eating disorders, because we have seen a resurgence of people on Instagram, TikTok, celebrating how skinny they are. I think it's fair to say that that can be very unhealthy, mentally and physically. How do we, explain a message that we're not endorsing starvation?
Yes.
We're very much explicitly talking about fasting, not starvation.
Yes.
And that we're not endorsing excessive skinniness.
Yeah.
What message would you give to people, parents watching this,
Yes.
young people, older people who might be at risk of that thinking? What advice can we
Totally.
give?
So
Would you
again,
give?
there's 2 things. We must differentiate fasting from starvation. So essentially, fasting is eating the excess debris within your system. Starvation is there's no nutrition, so you're eating muscle and good things. So there's a big distinction that when you go into autophagy or this fasting, it's about waste loss. Now, of course, if you don't have the waste loss, you're going to start eating the muscles.
Yeah.
So this is the first thing. The second thing is we shouldn't see this, although weight loss is a collateral benefit, this is about removing debris. So we must change the narrative that this is a clean out, it's a deep clean.
But for someone like me, who had a body fat percentage of 29.3, that's not good.
Yeah.
And it went down to 24%. It still needs to go down a lot lower.
Yeah.
I was okay on that.
Totally.
But someone that doesn't have those fat reserves,
You wouldn't go down that route.
Yeah.
And if you have a psychologically abnormal sort of relationship with food, you probably wouldn't go down that
okay.
route.
So in the room we have Andy, who subsequent to doing the We're Not Fighting podcast with you has lost some weight. He didn't really need to, but I think he's got down, but maybe he's got down to even more healthy weight. Natasha is here as well. Natasha, would you like to just ask the question of your, just of Ash, for you, what advice would, if someone is, not at the same metabolic age as me, is female, is mid-20s, sorry, you are now mid-20s, 25. What question would you have for Ash about yourself?
Oh, I'd say, when would I do it? How do I know if I should do it?
Lovely.
And who should I go to?
Super. So those are 3 excellent questions. One thing we have to remember, men and women are different. Okay? Men have a hormone cycle of 24 hours, women have a 28-day cycle. Now, what is interesting in women is that fasting is not good in the second half of the cycle. The reason is that the body will not let go of your glycogen, the Mars bars, because it says it's not for you, it's for a potential baby. So if you put a woman in a fast who's having periods in the last half of the cycle, they will do very badly, because those systems are saying there's a second thing we have to think about. So we won't let go of your sugar. So the whole process won't work. So women, we fast on day 1 of the period to day 10. That's the safe fasting window. There are some authorities who say women should never fast. I think that's nonsense, because ultimately we're all building up this debris. Women aren't different to men in building up debris. But it's about safe and smart fasting. So if you're having periods, it would be day 1 to 10. How long and how much for? Well, what we would do is a body composition index, similar to what John's had, turn you inside and saying, you know what, you look slim, but you've got no muscle and you've got loads of fat. So there's something going on here. It's called skinny fat syndrome. So we would then look at your hormones and you would be okay fasting. The most important thing is we would just make sure that your vitamins and minerals are in the right place before we do that. So essentially, looking slim doesn't mean you're not going to benefit from fasting. So essentially, we have to look at these parameters before we do it. Then it becomes how long? Well, I look and see how many kilos are sitting in that fat larder. If there's 6 or 4 or 3, will determine whether you do a 2-day window of water fasting, 5 days of 1 meal a day, 14 days of 1 meal a day. So it's very bespoke to you.
Let's take someone at an extreme who has very little fat.
Yeah.
They're petite, female. Does that take you to something like a 2-day fast at that extreme?
Right. Perfect.
Yeah.
2-day water fast, 3 to 5 days OMAD.
So anyone of any body type, as long as they don't have something medically that one can talk about as anorexia or bulimia or any eating disorder,
Yeah.
but anyone that doesn't have those issues, pretty much anyone can do a 2-day fast.
Totally.
Okay.
Yes, because
and
you
that's
have
because
the
it's the
reserves.
autophagy. That's
Yeah,
getting into
you'll get
autophagy.
into autophagy quicker because there's less glycogen, there's less Mars bars to work with, so it goes straight to zone 2.
So the
then
job
zone
of
3.
everyone fasting is to get through glycogen.
Totally.
And you don't necessarily need to begin to eat into muscle because within the 48 hours you will be depleting glycogen and nothing more.
Exactly.
Okay.
Totally.
Thank you. Ash, as ever with you, this has sparked a whole bunch of potentially new conversations, new stories, new John Vincent Podcast episodes. One of the things which I'm so happy to be able to do is to share this with people that are in my situation. So my situation was, I was very athletic when I was young. I think actually I did eat a lot of Mars bars. My mum did feed me a lot of Mars bars. She rang me about age 20, so I was 24. She goes, John, I've just read an article. I said, what was the article, Mum? She goes, I've just read that Coca-Cola's not good for you. And I was literally flummoxed. I was like, duh, Mum, of course it's not. I was like, why would Coca-Cola not be good for you? That's what I mostly drank. Anyway, so I had a childhood where I probably had a reasonable amount of Mars bars and sugar. My nana, that's what she was called, Nana used to feed me glucose tablets for energy, not ATP, she gave me glucose tablets. So I then went into my early 20s and became a little bit fat. And I've never been skinny since, as you can see. But I have to thank you so much, Ash, for providing the only thing that's ever worked for me. I've stood with the personal trainer, on January the 3rd, after New Year's Day, first day back at term, back in the year, and written down for the 24th time, eat less, exercise more, as if it's the first time I've ever heard it, and as if it was the knowledge of that was the issue before. And then a year later, I've gone from I'll be less fat by the summer. Oh, I failed. I'll be less fat by my birthday. Oh, I failed. I'll be less fat by Christmas. And I've been in that cycle for many, many years.
As with the majority of the population.
I can completely identify with blokes that are just finding it difficult to lose weight.
And what you've got to remember, the solution isn't on the outside. The solution is in the inside. That's where we must look.
And so what I can say to someone, watching this, listening to this, someone who is in that situation, this has been the thing that has allowed me to regulate and get to a systemically lower level of fat and higher energy and better autophagy, because we know it's not about weight. But in a nutshell, what advice would you give to someone who's listening to this thinking, I just can't do it. I can't do 10 days. What's going on? I know you've given advice, but in a nutshell, what would you say to that person?
You won't fail, is what I would say. And you need to convince yourself, because we're working with your DNA, your blueprint and your cell. And unless you're not a mammal, you can't fail.
Thank you for that. So if there are any birds watching this, or any lizards, Actually, we shouldn't be so speciesist, should we? You are so speciesist. Why just... Anyway, no, you're right. We have mammalian characteristics. But what I would say is that I'd like now to get down to, say, 15% body fat.
Yeah.
Is that about, what percentage body fat is right for someone like me? Optimized, because 9 is too low.
Yeah.
10 would be athletic.
Yes.
15 is a good target for me.
I think 15% is an excellent target.
Okay.
And I would say now, once you've done the full autophagy, what you need to do is look at the next 2 or 3 months on how you're going to behave. And one of the new things that I'm doing is alternate eating. So broth one evening, food the next evening.
Okay.
Broth one evening, food the next evening. So what this is
one
doing,
meal a day on the non-broth day, just a broth on the alternate
and the day
day.
that you have your food, have a mixture of carb, protein, etc.
Okay.
But this,
and Jaffa cakes or not?
if you wanted a Jaffa cake, it's okay.
Sure.
Because because if you think about it, it's a 48-hour cycle.
Okay.
So, this then creates a behavior pattern and you will get to your weight very comfortably.
Okay, thank
But
you.
also you can still be in society and do things with them.
So the broth, just clarify, that would be a clear broth? Or would that, so clear broth, like a bone broth or whatever?
No,
Yeah, okay.
Phenomenal for you. It's got the right protein, right collagen, keeps the gut going.
Okay. When you've done 3 days on your one and you go back into day 4, etc., you suggest no protein.
I do.
Do you explain, if someone wants to do not 10 days, but someone wants to do the 14 days, can you explain what the meal program is for those 14 days?
Yeah. The first 3 days is about moving the Mars bars and creating an environment where you're eating all your protein debris. Now, if you were to take protein on day 4, the brain will say, it's coming, so let's stop autophagy. So it won't go to the debris if you're feeding it. So you can't feed yourself protein because you have to eat the debris from within. That's the reason for no protein. We know most patients will get into full-blown autophagy or complete it by day 8 or 9.
Right.
So
you're trying to retain that.
Yes.
And say to the body, don't go to protein yet, continue the autophagy.
Exactly. Now, if you're slim and you don't have much in the way of Mars bars, you're going to hit that place quicker.
Right.
So for those individuals, they're probably going to get a full-blown autophagy by day 4 or 5.
So you actually, at that point, you want them to have protein to preserve the muscle mass.
And how do I know? Well, basically, when I do the body comp indexes, the muscle mass looks like it's falling, but it's not muscle mass because we know that this machine can't tell the difference between debris and muscle.
Right.
So, we know testosterone goes up, so you won't lose muscle mass. But once it gets flatlined, you know that the autophagy is done.
Right, thank you, Ash.
And then the muscle mass goes up.
Ash, let's have operation 15%.
Yes.
Without the operation.
Comfortable.
But I would really appreciate your support on that.
So 4 meals, eat what you like in the evening.
Yes.
3 meals, just bone broth on a 7-day window.
Okay, amazing.
Easy.
Ash, we're not doing this for me, we're doing this for the people watching.
Yes.
And listening.
Yes.
And I just want to say to them, they can have faith not in me, not in you, but in themselves.
100%. We need to unleash the superhero which exists in all of us.
Thanks, mate.
Good.
Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Lovely. Good.